Hello, and welcome to the program. I am Suren. We will continue with our discussion about the subject which has been confirmed many times over by different communications with others, as well as through the psychic groupings, remote seers, and psychics in a worldwide community, but not necessarily just a general psychic, but rather those psychologically assessed, trustworthy ones. And they all have confirmed the same information and wisdom, although they lived far apart and lived in different places around the world. From Great Britain to Australia, United States to Fiji, to Philippines, and to New Zealand. And they all are in agreement with what we are considering here. Remember, we were talking about the spiritual discernment and the people of great artistic achievements in the higher dimensions as the wise, and we spoke about the creative life. Here was an image just drawn from the young soul's memories and are considerably more beautiful than, but not unlike the country being illustrated in which he lived and wherein his associates have also been knowledgeable. Of course, this country is not real or actual. It is a dream and imagined by, but then again, to this person that we are visualizing it to be as real as it was. Let's say that his television set and his clock, which used to wake him up in the morning and summoning him to his work or to his office. Obviously, it presents more attractive appearance or presence than the little grey townships around the world. However, it is basically made up so of the same or familiar stuff, but possibly different from those other cities around the world, which this dream state or sequence, in here he eventually finds his associates and friends, even his own kin, and people from he truly loved. That is, if they have gone before him. However, that is not the physical side as you would know. Consider now that our imagined person is in familiar surroundings or in an environment where everything to him is very physical. It is made of the material or the 3D world and do not arouse his natural timidity. Let us consider that he is, in a sense, a simple person, a simple soul who had led a respectable life. Let's say that he lived in moderation. He really used his years of his life in a certain place on earth very well. Obviously, after parting with his physical body again, occupying surroundings or environment within which to a great extent, he is familiar and facing yet another existence with some other characteristics. However, in reality, it is not even similar. It is during this period of change, which may be fast or slow for him, and hopefully very interesting. Indeed, his life in the world, dating from, let's say, 1800s to 1900s, corresponded with the germinating life of seed in the earth. He reaches eventually the end of his term of years and passes into another life, and must imagine now that he has been given some items of interest, as well as some little plants, and he places them in the garden. If they were suitable in the house, and when, as described, he happily introduces them to a world of form, similar in character to the one they had previously known. What we are now discovering is that these wayfarers find themselves in familiar surroundings amongst people of a similar mentality. But they find very frequently that their actual needs are not the same. They are not condemned to some mechanically performed task for the greater part of their existence, because their etheric bodies, for example, do not require food to start with. They drew what is essential for their well-being from that all-pervading, invisible substance, which we will be talking about later. On earth, people are or have become like slaves of the physical body, and therefore slaves of darkness. In the hereafter, we may truly say that, given certain conditions, they become the servants of the light. As food, or its equivalent, money, is not the principal object of their existence, they have at last time to serve the light. That is to say, they are in a position in which they can reflect at their leisure and begin to reach towards this strange and marvelous life of the mind, and through which is the solution of the physical body. At least one desperate, glamorous need has gone from us. We do not any longer require the 3 or 4 meals a day that were of such excessive importance. One primal factor in earth life is eliminated, and that is hunger. But we have other factors of great importance to consider. After hunger comes sex. Has this also disappeared with the dissolution of the body? That's a good question. In most cases, the answer to that should be in the negative. It has not disappeared, but it is changed. And here we come face to face with one of the great problems in this period of transition. First, it is indeed quite necessary to attempt some definition of sexual desire. As we all know, it takes many forms. Alas, some of these are perverted. Let us deal now with these perversions first, and so we shall consider what man calls sin if religiously inclined. Cruelty perhaps cuts more deeply into human nature than any other concern, like sex-oriented perversion. It marks the human soul, scars it more deeply than almost any other vice. The cruel man who has changed his natural craving for affection into a longing to give pain to others necessarily finds himself in a world here where he cannot satisfy this craving. He has probably pondered about it during all his life, and so it has become an integral part of his soul. In the new life, he has not, for a time at any rate, the power to inflict pain on anything living. This means, for him, with his greatly increased mental powers and terrible stress or distress, he goes about seeking whom he may devour and finding naught. The misery of such an unsatisfied state is largely of a mental character. What use to him is a world of light and beauty, while still this foul earth longing is unsatisfied? For this unfortunate person, there is only one release from his mental purgatory, and until he can find a way of escape, until there is an actual change in his cold, cruel soul, he will remain in outer darkness. Christ spoke of that outer darkness as being the lot of sinners. By just saying, he did not imply darkness as we know it, but the darkness recognized by the senses. He actually meant a darkness of soul and mental distress, a perverted desire that cannot find its satisfaction. Eventually, this individual faces up to his own misery, to his vice, and then the great change comes. He is put in touch with a portion of the great memory which Apostle John has called the Book of Life. He becomes aware of all the emotions roused in his victims by his acts. He enters into a small part of the mighty superconscious memory of his generation, which hovers near the earth. No pain, no anguish he has caused is perished. All has been recorded and registered. He has now a kind of existence that makes him sensible of it. Once he has drifted into touch with the web of memory that clothed his life and the life of those who came into contact with him on earth. The history of the cruel man in the hereafter would probably make a book, which we are not permitted to write, as it was said before. I can only briefly add that his soul or mind becomes gradually purified through his identification with the sufferings of his victims he needs to face. Let's go back to the subject of our illustrated man in order to explain what is meant by Christ's statement that the sinner is cast into outer darkness, where there is wailing and gnashing of teeth. It really is a mental darkness into which the sinner plunges. His own perverted nature has drawn this suffering upon himself. He had free will, the power to choose, and temporarily, at any rate, he chose this mental darkness in the afterlife. Let us take, for example, a man, or if you prefer, a woman, who has led an immoral life on earth. Here we may borrow a saying of the angel who appeared to John. He that is filthy, let him be filthy still. So the man who comes into his life with a sex history of a reprehensible kind finds, when he enters the kingdom of the mind, that as his mental perceptions are sharpened, so his predominant mental desire is intensified, his mental power being far more considerable. He can, in truth, at will, summon to himself those who will gratify this overdeveloped side of his nature. Others of his kind will gravitate to him. And for a time, these beings live in a sex paradise. But bear in mind that it is created by their mental makeup, by their memories, and their imagination. They seem to yearn still for gross sensation, not for that final life, which is the spirit of sexual love, that perfect friendship, without the gratification of the grosser feelings. They obtain it in abundance, and there follows a horrible satiety. They come to loathe what they can obtain in excess and with ease. And then they find it extraordinarily difficult to escape from those who share these pleasures with them. A murderer, too, comes into the category of such folk. It is a sudden perverted desire, a lust for cruelty, which leads in many cases to murder. The last state in illusion land might be termed the purgatorial state. Obviously, it is extremely painful to realize the misery of satiety, to come to the end of the desired pleasure. There is one greater misfortune than the non-realization of the heart's desire, and that is its realization. For human beings are so constituted that they are almost invariably seeking a false dream, a will of the wisp, and no permanent content can be obtained from its fulfillment. It is, of course, impossible to lay down an iron rule or any rule. Each individual has a different experience from each other individual in Hades and illusion land. In certain cases, he is not given the power to satisfy his desires. Actually, he is able to do so, but his own ego does not permit such satisfaction. For instance, the cold, selfish man in illusion land may dwell in darkness, for it is not within the power of his ego to throw itself outwards, to express itself in the fantasy of fulfilled desires. He is thrown more than ever inwards by the shock of death. He believes he has lost everything. He loses contact with all except the sense of his own thinking existence. A nightmare of darkness prevails for a time, prevails as long as it lives within his morbid sense of loss, within his desire, which is merely to gratify himself alone, without any regard for others. There may be only night in illusion land for the abnormally selfish man. Nearly every soul lives for a time in the state of illusion. The large majority of human beings, when they die, are dominated by the conception that their particular experience of substance is the only reality. They are not prepared for an immediate and complete change of outlook. They patiently yearn for familiar, though idealized surroundings. Their will to live is merely to live, therefore in the past. So they enter that dream, the illusion land. For instance, if our illustrated person, who represented the unthinking man in the street, would probably desire a glorified brick villa in a glorified suburb. So he finds himself the proud possessor of that current century atrocity. He naturally gravitates towards his acquaintances, all those who were of the like mind. On earth, he may have longed for a superior brand of wine. He can have the experience of drinking this brand. He wanted to play golf, so he plays golf. He wanted to play football, so he does so. But he's merely dreaming all the time, or rather living within the fantasy created by his strongest desires on earth. After a while, this life of pleasure ceases to amuse and content him. Then he begins to think and long for the unknown, long for a new life. He's at last prepared to make the leap in his evolution, and this cloudy dream vanishes. The communicator from the other dimension speaks of the consciousness, and he informs the listener. On earth, consciousness is as a lamp lit each morning when you awake. Where if you are in poor health, the flame is feeble. If you are young and vigorous, it flares up and seems to illumine every material object you face, giving to it special and happy radiance surrounding you. This daily consciousness changes according to age and experience. From one year's end to another, it is never quite the same, though you probably do not notice it, almost imperceptible changes. It is that ego which sees, touches, hears, and is aware of the material world. We have already spoken that this fantastic being is a sum in arithmetic. After death and after the stages of transition, that ego, with certain important changes, again resumes its sway. Whatever the plane of being on which it arrives, it is now a traveler who has discarded flesh and blood, the brain cells, the intricate web of nerves, which brought unity and proportion to the body, and which made of it a kingdom. In its place, there is a very much finer shape. This shape also possesses its means of communication, and these feed the new structure of very subtle atoms. It is, as mentioned before, a structure so rare, so fine, that it is invisible to the earthian physical eye, in humans anyway, and eludes the finest instruments of the scientists. Actual pain is not felt in any of the parts of this new image of man. For now, his mind has greatly increased its powers. And though it may experience pain in the spiritual or intellectual sense, such happens to be its control of the outward form belonging to him. On the fourth plane, however, that form cannot hurt in the earthly or physical sense. Therefore, it cannot be, in any respect, the ruler. You will realize, therefore, that an important advance has been made. On the other hand, man has still to pass through many states, to experience numberless lives before he draws near the goal, before he reaches out towards some fulfillment. Roughly, we can define his consciousness for the greater part of his journey as follows: spirit or higher soul, ego or lower soul, and their manifestation in form. There's also what one might consider the ladder of consciousness. The rungs of the ladder represent the various lives from the alleged beginning to the final achievement, though it is not for us to say that there is any finality. When we use the term final, it is merely to indicate the limits of one's vision. Now the soul of ego, or the ego itself, is the actual self, or surface awareness, on each rung of the ladder. The spirit is the light from above and illuminates every rung of the ladder, embraces the whole. The soul, then, is merely the part, gatherer of experiences, the representative of the mysteries behind all life. The higher the ego climbs on the ladder of consciousness, the nearer it draws to other kindred souls. We have already spoken about it, that there may be thousands, 100 or merely 20 souls, all fed and nourished by the same one spirit. Consciousness of souls increases on the higher levels of existence. In time, they are able to enter into the other souls' memories, perceive their experiences, and be sensible of them, as if they were theirs. Mind becomes communal in the last stages. For the spirit, the unifying principle is tending all the time to produce greater harmony, and therefore greater unity. These various individuals are merging more and becoming one in experience and in mind, and thus attaining to undreamt of levels of intellectual power. On the lower rungs of this ladder of consciousness dwell those souls who still cling to human habits of thought, to the earthly personality, to their own individual line of thought. Some of them have been extremely learned, but knowledge does not make a wise man. A great Indian yogi, a Chinese sage, a learned or holy Christian father may dwell for eons of time within the third and fourth super-terrestrial states. They are typical representatives of soul man, and they have his shortcomings. They cling to the line of thought which was theirs on earth, so they remain sadly individualized in it. They are caught in its dream and snared in the many errors thereof. For instance, the Indian yogi and Chinese sage may still seek only to follow the aspiration of their particular belief or philosophy, the freeing of the soul from metta, ecstatic contemplation of the universe. They appear to gain their aspiration, but in consequence, they abide merely on one of the lower rungs of the ladder. They believe that they have attained to nirvana, that they have passed out yonder, entered into the mystery of God, but they have done nothing of the kind. They are still individualized, still clinging to their blissful little dream created when they were on earth. They are living in the stagnant pond. They are progressing neither up nor down. They have no contact with the material aspect of the universe. And the state of alleged ecstatic contemplation narrows and limits experience, confines them still in the prison of their own ego. As remarked before, that when souls reached to the higher ranges of the ladder, they became merged in the unifying spirit and might at last journey out wonder. At last, the journey out yonder, I should say, enter into the mystery of God. In so doing, they slow form and no longer express themselves in an outward appearance. But these spirits who pass out yonder do not dwell in ecstatic contemplation, as does the sage or the yogi. They are, though formless, in contact with the whole of the material universe. An incredible activity of a spiritual and intellectual kind is theirs. For now they share in the timeless mystery. Now they are in the true nirvana, in the highest Christian heaven, if you like. They know and experience the Alpha and Omega of the material universe, the chronicle of all planetary life, the history of the earth from the beginning to the end are theirs. Truly, they are not merely heirs, they have become inheritors, indeed and in truth, of eternal life. You are, as you climb the long ladder of consciousness, a sum in arithmetic. When you pass out yonder, you become the whole. The spirit which lights up the ladder is an individualized thought of God. One may have thought that it may dwell within its own life, or that may still be in intense and direct contact with God, when that thought contacts directly the human ego. Spirit man is a human being of whom perhaps a few score have appeared on earth since time began. He differs from others in that his spirit retains that intense and direct inspiration from God when it enters into time and communicates with the incarnate man. Therefore, spirit man alone has expressed eternal truth, either in his life or in his words. When his physical body dies, he dwells in Hades, but he does not tarry in illusion land. Swiftly he passes up the rungs of the ladder. Easily may he become one with the Father, for even while on earth he has known the Father, having drawn his inspiration from the imagination of God. With this, I end today's program and wish you well. Be happy and smile often. Until we meet again. Thank you.